Imagine listening to an orchestra where every instrument is playing a solo at the same time. Each musician might sound incredible on their own, but when you put them all together, it's just chaos. And that's exactly what happens in a lot of homes. Every color in a room is trying to stand out, so nothing actually works. So in this video, I'm going to share a unique way to think about color that'll explain why your room feels off and show you exactly how to fix it. And if you stick around until the end, you'll learn a color framework you can reuse in every room to make your entire home look and feel amazing. So most people think color problems come from choosing the wrong colors. They'll say a room feels loud or flat or messy and immediately assume the color palette is bad. So they start swapping paint colors, replacing pillows, and changing out the artwork, trying to fix the recipe by changing the ingredients. But a surprising amount of the time, the colors themselves aren't the issue. The real problem is that the room doesn't have a clear sense of order, and too many colors are trying to be important at the same time, or none of them are. And when that happens, your eye doesn't know where to settle, even if every individual color is perfectly fine on its own. And this is where most people get stuck, because they're reacting to the feeling of the room without understanding what's causing it. So their solutions are random. Add something here, tone something down over there, and really just hope for the best. But color doesn't work randomly. It works through hierarchy, because our eyes are always looking for structure. They want to understand what matters most, what supports that, and what's just there to add a bit of interest. And when a room doesn't give our eye that information, everything starts competing for our attention, and the space feels unsettled, even if we can't explain why. And this is the moment where color stops being about taste and starts being about balance. So to explain this phenomenon, I want to introduce you to a way of thinking about color that a lot of interior designers rely on, which is known as the 60-30-10 rule. So the 60-30-10 rule is a way of assigning jobs to color so your room can visually organize itself. So instead of asking which colors do I like, you're asking which color is allowed to lead, which color is supporting it, and which color only speaks up occasionally. You know, the percentages that we're going to talk about aren't about measuring with a calculator, they're more about proportion and dominance. And so 60% is whatever your eye reads as the background of the room, 30% is what you notice next, and 10% is what you notice last, generally those little moments that add a bit of energy without taking over the room. And when people struggle with color, it's often because they skip this sort of thinking entirely. You know, they have 5 colors all acting like accents, or one bold color trying to do everything at once. But the 60-30-10 rule forces you into restraint. It limits how much influence each color is allowed to have, and that's what creates calm in your room. Because this isn't about removing color, it's about giving it some healthy boundaries. And once you understand how it works, the rule stops feeling restrictive. It actually starts feeling pretty freeing, because you can use neutrals, you can use bold colors, and you can even bend the percentages a little as long as the hierarchy is clear. Because your room doesn't care about the exact numbers. It just cares that one color feels dominant, one feels supportive, and one feels a little bit special. So the 60% is the anchor. You know, this is the color that carries the room and quietly holds everything together. It usually lives on the larger surfaces, which is why it tends to be the color you first notice when you walk in, even if it isn't bold. And so walls are the obvious example here, but it can also be the color of large pieces of cabinetry if that's what spans most of your space. And so when you squint your eyes and the details fall away, this is the color that remains. And generally, the reason that a color like this can work in such large amounts is because it isn't trying to grab your attention. Instead, it's creating a backdrop that lets everything else exist on top of it. Then, the 30% is the supporting color. And its job is to break up the dominance of the main color without challenging it. And when this is done well, it generally introduces contrast, warmth, or a bit of depth, and it keeps the room from feeling flat or overly uniform. And so you'll often see this supporting color come through in furniture pieces, textiles, wood tones, or other finishes that repeat throughout your space. It needs to show up enough that your eye recognizes it as intentional, but not so much that it starts competing with the main color for control. And then there's the 10%, which is the smallest part of the rule, but often the most misunderstood. Because this 10% accent color isn't there to fill gaps or add variety everywhere. Its job is to create emphasis. You know, it's meant to catch your eye in specific moments and then let it move on. So this is where you'll often see bolder colors, sharper contrast, and finishes that stand out more. And it generally comes in the form of artwork, pillows, objects, flowers, and other small details that give your room energy. When this accent color is used sparingly and intentionally, it feels really powerful. But when it's scattered everywhere, it starts to lose its impact and feel more like visual noise. So really, what makes the 60-30-10 rule work so consistently is that it gives each color a clear role. One color leads, one supports, and one just punctuates. And once those roles are clear, the room stops feeling like a collection of individual pieces and starts feeling like a single idea. And your eye can finally relax because it understands that hierarchy. Nothing is fighting for attention, but nothing feels random either. This is why I say you don't need to measure these colors. You don't need to calculate square footage or count the number of objects. You just need to ask if you've got that hierarchy where one color is dominant, another is secondary, and the rest of the room is showing restraint. So now I want to look at a few rooms where the 60-30-10 rule is working cleanly and quietly, not in an obvious color blocked kind of way, but in a way that just feels balanced when you're in the space. In this dining room, the 60% or the dominant color is clearly white. You know, the walls, the ceiling, and most of the background surfaces are all really light, so white becomes the foundation that everything else sits on. It keeps the room feeling open, bright, and calm, and it allows light to move easily through the space without interruption. The 30% or the secondary color comes from the timber tones in the table, chairs, and the light fixture above. These warm wood elements show up often enough that your eye recognizes them as a system, not as random pieces, and they break up the white just enough to keep the room from feeling sterile, but at the same time, they never overpower it. And this is exactly what the 30% is meant to do: add warmth and contrast without fighting for control of the room. And then the 10%, or the accent color, is the blue-green tone that comes through in the window frames and the cushions. You know, it's dotted around the room, creating these gentle points of interest without changing the overall mood. And because the color is so well restrained, it feels refreshing, not distracting. You know, it adds a bit of life to the room, but never asks to become the main character. And so this is a perfect demonstration of the 60-30-10 rule at work. Now, in this bedroom, the balance works a little differently, but the logic stays the same. Here, the 60% is made up of soft taupe tones on the walls, carpet, curtains, and most of the bedding, and these colors wrap the room in a single layer, which is why the room feels so calm. And even though there are multiple materials involved, they all sit close enough in tone that your eye reads them as a single dominant color. Then the 30% comes from the darker brown elements, the headboard, the chair, and the pendant light above it. These have a bit more visual weight to them, but they're still contained. And because they're repeated across the room, they feel deliberately chosen. And then the accent color shows up in the fresh pops of white, which you see on the piece of art on the wall, the pillows, and on the side table. They stand out against all the warm tones around them, and they add a bit of contrast, which helps the room feel lighter and more refined without breaking the overall softness of the space. Now, in this living room, the green on the walls, the ceiling, and the sofa is definitely the dominant color. The beige on the flooring, rug, coffee table, chairs, and curtains is the secondary color, which softens out the green and allows it to feel really rich. These black accents add a bit of sharpness to the room and just help your eye understand the structure of the space. Now, it's important to point out that the 60-30-10 rule is a guideline, not a strict formula you're meant to follow perfectly. You're not supposed to stand in your room counting colors or worrying about whether something is 10% or 12%, because the goal here, just like in most aspects of design, isn't precision, it's clarity. And so the rule is a way to step back and see whether the color in your space has a clear sense of order, or whether everything is being treated as equally important when it really shouldn't be. That's why you'll see great rooms that don't follow the rule exactly, but still feel balanced. Sometimes the dominant color isn't neutral. Sometimes there are multiple shades within the same color family. And sometimes patterns introduce extra colors, and yet the room still works because the hierarchy is still there. So is the 60-30-10 rule the only way to think about color in your home? Absolutely not, but it's one way that a lot of people have found helpful, so I wanted to share it with you in case you find it helpful too. Because if you have no idea how to think about color in your home, you won't have the confidence to make good decisions, or any decision at all. And we all know what it's like to make decisions in our lives when we're lacking confidence, and that's just not a good position to be in. So instead, I hope having a framework like this will give you the confidence you need to make better decisions in your home. So if you found this explainer helpful, I go a lot deeper into these kinds of ideas with my email subscribers, so click the link in the description and drop in your email. Some of my best ideas only get shared via email, so you don't want to miss that. And if you want to learn another framework I've developed for making your home look and feel its best, check out this video up here where I'm going to teach you how to make any room look high-end with just a few easy changes. I'll see you there.